Hi, are you confident asking questions in English? Are you one of those people who isn't sure how to ask a question when it starts with who? Do you usually ask questions with how many times rather than using the words how often? Do you often ask questions with how many days rather than how long? Well, if you're having difficulty asking questions, particularly more complex questions in English, this is the video for you. This is Susan Broder from Speak Languages and Travel the World, here to help you improve your English with minimum effort and maximum benefit. And today I'd like to teach you how to express yourself more naturally with complex questions. And therefore I've created a series of questions which also incorporate tricky pronunciation or maybe vocabulary you wouldn't normally use in order to help you practice your question formation. So let's dive straight into it. Introduction to subject-object questions. In order to be able to ask questions properly, first of all, we have to analyze the sentences and how they're made up. So I've taken a very simple sentence, Susan visits the Pope. Why is this? Because the Pope is, of course, a very important person. He's the head of the Catholic religion, and he will never come and visit Susan, obviously, because I'm a nobody. So I chose this sentence in order to make sure that it's not possible for it to seem reciprocal. Susan will go and visit the Pope won't come and visit Susan. Now, Susan is the subject of the sentence and the Pope is the object. If you want to discover the subject of a sentence, you know that somebody goes and visits the Pope, but you want to know who. So, to discover the subject, you have to use the word who. And you will ask, who visits the Pope? And the answer will be Susan. Instead, if you know that Susan goes to visit somebody, but you have no idea who this person is, you will use the expression who does, because you want to discover the object of the sentence. So you'll ask, who does Susan visit? Eliminating also the S, because in this case we've got the S on the does. So the question would be, who does Susan visit? And the answer is Susan visits the Pope. Okay, so this is very important. Most questions are asked when we want to discover the object. So who does, who did, and so on. 90% of the questions are asked when we want to know the object of a sentence and not the subject of a sentence. However, there are questions where we need to know the subject and then we'll be asking with who. We can also ask questions with other words such as how, but we'll get to see that as we're going along. Examples of subject-object questions. So, bearing in mind what we've now discovered, let's try and ask some sentences using the colours and the prompts. So the sentence is, Mary gets to work late every morning. Now, gets to, I've underlined it because it means arrive. When you want to explain that someone arrives at work or arrives somewhere using the verb get, it'll turn into the phrasal verb get to. You have to always use the preposition to with get when you want it to mean arrive. So Mary arrives at work. Mary gets to work late every morning. The first question is with the prompt where. So we know that Mary gets somewhere late every morning, and we ask, where does Mary get to late every morning. The question is with does. Where does Mary get to late every morning? Now we can revert, and we know that Mary gets to work late every morning, and now we want to know who. So somebody gets to work late every morning, and we'll ask who. Since we're asking the subject, we'll ask just who gets to work late every morning. And as you can see here, there's no auxiliary do. In the first sentence, we had where does she get too late. In the second one, we've eliminated the auxiliary because when we want to know the subject, we only use who, as I had mentioned earlier. Now, we know that Mary gets to work late very regularly, and therefore we'll ask, how often does Mary get to work late? Mary get to work late. So you can see that depending on the information you need, the question will change. But as I mentioned earlier, most questions take the auxiliary do or does. Therefore, where does or how often does Mary, opposed to who, which is requesting the subject of the sentence, and therefore it needs no auxiliary. Okay, now let's try the same with Julie. Somebody is studying social sciences in Amsterdam. Who is studying social sciences in Amsterdam? If you look, we're actually repeating the sentence as it stands. Who is studying social sciences in Amsterdam? So the sentence structure remains exactly the same. What you also need to notice is the pronunciation. Social. Many people pronounce this C as a ch sound, but it's not social, it's social. Who is studying social sciences in Amsterdam? And also, the pronunciation here of this word is science. Many people pronounce it science. So, social science. Here are some other examples of pronunciation. Social with a sh sound. Passion with a sh sound. And nation with a sh sound. So you can see that these three words have completely different spellings, but the sh is the common denominator. Social, passion, nation. In the second column, we have the CI, society, and association. The third column has scissors, science. So in any case, the combination SCI is S. Scissors, science, and fascinating. So you can see that English pronunciation is not so easily determined by its spelling. Who is studying social sciences in Amsterdam? Now we want to know what Julie is studying. She's studying something in Amsterdam, but we don't know what she's studying. So What is Julie studying in Amsterdam? And for this, we need to move and invert the verb and the subject. So, what is Julie studying in Amsterdam? That's an inversion. Now we're interested in where. We know that Julie is studying somewhere, but we don't know where. So, where, inversion, is Julie studying social sciences? Julie is studying social sciences in Amsterdam. Questions with auxiliary and non-auxiliary verbs. Now you'll notice that in the second sentence I was making an inversion with Julie is or is Julie, whilst in the first sentence I wasn't. This is to remind you that here we have the verb to be, and so when you ask a question you invert. Whilst here we have get, and with get you use the auxiliary do or does. Questions expressed in various tenses. Now we have Mr. Allison, who worried about his job. Mr. Allison worried. Worried is simple past. So we want to know what he worried about. What did Mr. Allison worry about? Here we can ask what. Then we need the auxiliary did. So what did Mr. Allison worry? We have to put the base form again. What did Mr. Allison worry about? This is the first question. Instead, if we want to know somebody worried about his job, but we don't know who, we just ask simply, who worried about his job, leaving the sentence structure exactly the same. The answer is Mr. Allison. Okay, now we have another sentence. Somebody was the best student in her class. We leave it quite simply. Who was the best student in her class? The sentence structure remains the same because we're asking about the subject. The answer is Bridget. Instead, we know that Bridget was something for her class, but we have no idea. She could have been a nuisance. So, we ask, what was Bridget in her class? And we know that she was the best student in her class. Another sentence. David has been married to Jane for 10 years. This is the present perfect. So let's ask the first question. Who has been married to Jane for 10 years? Structure remains the same. David, of course. Now we know that David has been married, but we've no idea how long. So we'll ask, how long has David been married to Jane? How long is a very typical expression in English. Many foreigners will ask, how many years? But how many years is absolutely correct. However, we'll naturally say how long rather than how many years has David been married to Jane. How long has David been married to Jane? He's been married to her for 10 years. Now, again, I'd forgotten to note that marry to, you are married to someone. Now, the next question is a little bit trickier. In colloquial English, we'll say who. But when we want to know about the object of a sentence, in this case Jane, it would be more correct to say whom with the M. Now, whom is very, very formal, sometimes even old-fashioned. Definitely to whom I would repute to be quite old-fashioned, and whom is very, very formal. So, who is what we would normally say, even though we're referring to the object, because we intend whom with the M. So the question is, who has David been married to for 10 years? Let me repeat this one. Who has David been married to for 10 years? He's been married to someone and we don't know who. And remember that this who is referring to the object because it should really be whom. We could also ask, to whom has David been married? Obviously, we would have to get rid of the to because we've put it in front. But it is really, really formal. Okay. So this was to make you notice that nowadays we usually say who also for the object, but we're really referring to whom. Now, before I go on to the next sentence, I want you to note that psychiatrist does not pronounce the P, and that's why I've put it in grey. So let's cross this P out because we really don't pronounce it. It's psychiatrist without the P. So Tim has been seeing a psychiatrist every week. We know that somebody has been seeing a psychiatrist every week, but we don't know who. So who has been seeing a psychiatrist every week? Again, the sentence structure when you want to ask about the subject remains the same. Let's look at the next question. So, this time we're asking about the object. Whom or who has Tim, again inversion because it's an auxiliary, who has Tim been seeing every week? We know he's been seeing someone, but we don't know who it is. Now, finally, the last question is how often? Now, many foreigners will ask, how many times? And it's not wrong to ask how many times has Tim been seeing a psychiatrist. But it's not so natural. We would naturally ask, how often has Tim been seeing a psychiatrist? That's the more natural question we would ask. And the answer is every week. The last sentence which we'll analyze before going on to some exercises for you to try yourselves. Oral exercises, because my focus is on you being able to form these questions orally, naturally, without having to always write things down and think things out. And that's why the subsequent exercises I'll give you are oral listen and repeat exercises where you have to listen to the sentence and then I'll give you a prompt as here and you'll have to think of the correct answer and speak it. But it shouldn't be that difficult. It should over time become spontaneous if you listen and repeat these sentences quite often. So let's try an example here. Sarah is going on a trip to Thailand. So I would ask you who, and you would have to think. As you noticed, I gave you a gap and you should have thought of the question, and now you would say it, and I would give you the answer. Who is going on a trip to Thailand? After which you have a gap to repeat what I said. And that should reinforce it. Let's try the same with the second one. So the question is what? So Sarah is going on a trip to Thailand, and I'll leave you a gap for you to say, what? What is Sarah going on? Or what is Sarah going on to Thailand? She's going on a trip to Thailand. Now the question is where? Where is Sarah going on a trip? I think you've understood the mechanism. Now it's time to try it out yourselves. Exercises with how long in the sense of how many days, how many minutes. This is a question formation exercise. I want you to listen to the complete sentence, then listen to the prompt, and as soon as you've heard the prompt, try and form the question naturally. So now I'll tell you a sentence, after which I'll give you the prompt, and you have a lapse of time in which to try and say the sentence, after which I'll give you the answer, and you can repeat the answer before going on to the next question. Here is how it works. I do yoga for 30 minutes a day. How long? How long do you do yoga for? The second one. He's seeing the physiotherapist for an hour on Friday afternoon. How long? How long is he seeing the physiotherapist for? You could also say, how long is he seeing the physiotherapist for on Friday afternoon? But that wasn't necessary. It depends on the context, obviously. Next. I played in the local football team when I was a teenager. How long? How long did you play in the local football team when you were a teenager? Next. She was in the school orchestra for a year. How long? How long was she in the school orchestra for? The preposition is usually put on at the end because you need the preposition, so it goes at the end of the sentence. Next. They've been married for 36 years. How long? How long have they been married for? Next sentence. She's been playing the piano since she was a child. How long? How long has she been playing the piano? Next. We're going to stay a week in a bed and breakfast on the French Riviera. How long? How long are we going to stay in a bed and breakfast on the French Riviera? Next. I think we'll spend a fortnight in the mountains. How long? How long do you think you'll spend in the mountains? Because this sentence has I think, I would like you to use it in the question as well. How long do you think you'll spend in the mountains? Of course, you could also ask, how long will you spend in the mountains? But because we're not sure how long we'll spend in the mountains, I prefer you to use think in the question as well. Next. I wish I could read for half an hour a day. How long? How long do you wish you could read for a day? Similarly, here we have wish, so I would like wish to be in the question. How long do you wish you could read for in a day or read for a day? You could also ask how long could you read for a day, but it's not the same question, because how long would you like to be able to read is different from how long would you actually be able to read. So this is the end of the how long series of questions, and this is the more natural way we'd say it. We wouldn't say how many minutes, how many days, how many hours, even if they're correct. We wouldn't say it because it's not natural. We would use the expression how long. Exercises with how often, referring to how many times. The next series of questions start with how often, which is equivalent to how many times. But again, how many times is something that we wouldn't naturally say. We would more naturally say how often. So, I go to the gym twice a week. How often? How often do you go to the gym? Next. I sang in the choir once a week until I left school. How often? How often did you sing in the choir until you left school? Choir is a group of people singing together. It's pronounced choir, choir. The CH is pronounced in various ways in English, as a K in choir, character, charisma, chameleon, chemical, chemistry, and chemist, as a ch sound in charm, chapel, chimney, and as a sh sound in the name of the city of Chicago. Chicago. So, choir, character, charisma, chameleon, chemical, chemistry, chemist, charm, chapel, chimney, but the city is called Chicago. So the only way is really to learn every individual word and how it's pronounced. Next, they've been seeing each other every weekend. How often? How often have they been seeing each other? If you notice, to see each other in this case really refers to dating. It's not just a general meeting, it's more a romantic, sentimental meeting. So they've been going out together romantically every weekend. Next. We're going to go skiing every Sunday. How often? How often are we going to go skiing? If you notice, in all these questions, I'm trying to vary the present, the past, the future, the continuous forms to give you the possibility to practice the questions in various contexts and situations. I think we'll travel to see her as often as possible. How often? How often do you think you'll travel to see her? Next. I wish I could visit my grandmother in the nursing home once a month. How often? How often do you wish you could visit your grandmother in the nursing home? A nursing home is a place where elderly people who aren't independent can live. It's called a nursing home. Exercises with how long does it take questions. Now, a new series of questions which apparently seems the same as the previous one, starting with how long, but in this case it's slightly different because it uses the verb take. It takes me 30 minutes to get ready every morning. Get ready means prepare to be ready to start the day. So get up, get washed, have breakfast, get dressed, and so on. Be ready to start your day. It takes me 30 minutes to get ready every morning. How long? How long does it take you to get ready every morning? How long does it take you to get ready every morning? Next. It takes me an hour to get to work every day. How long? How long does it take you to get to work every day? Get to work means to arrive at work. It takes him half an hour to do his homework every afternoon. How long? How long does it take him to do his homework every afternoon? Next. It took her 5 years to get her degree. A degree is a university diploma. It took her 5 years to get her degree. How long? How long did it take her to get her degree? Next. It's taken me a long time to become so self-confident. How long? How long has it taken you to become so self-confident? Next. It's going to take us a year to move house. Move house means when you change house. So you live in one and you go and live in another. It's going to take us a year to move house. How long? How long is it going to take you to move house? I think it'll take at least 2 years before he gets a promotion. How long? How long do you think it'll take before he gets a promotion? Listen and repeat exercises starting with what. Now we start a new series with slightly easier questions. Before we start, I'd like you to notice that again we have a word starting with a P, an S, a Y and a CH. In this case, the P is not pronounced. It's a psychologist. Psychologist and not a psi. Psychologist. I'm a psychologist. So the question is, I'm a psychologist. What? What do you do? Now, you'll think this is a rather unusual question. It's not what are you, but what do you do is always related to your profession. So what do you do? What's your job? It's a very typical question. What do you do or what do you do in life? But it always refers to your profession and nothing else. So what do you do? I'm a psychologist. As a consequence, the next sentence, she's a housewife. What? What does she do? What's her job? Next, we're gardening. What? What are you doing? And as you notice, what do you do refers to your job, whilst what are you doing refers to what's happening actually at the moment. What are you doing? Again, now these questions that I'm writing and explaining to you, I'm not saying them in absolutely natural English because I want you to be able to understand the different parts of the question clearly. Some of you may be driving whilst listening and repeating, so I want to do it slowly and clearly. However, no British person would say, what are you doing? We'd connect it all together and say, what are you doing? What are you doing? We wouldn't even hear the R. What are you doing? What are you doing? Next. He's feeding the cat. What? What's he doing? What's he doing? Exercises with why or with how come, which are similar. He's shopping at the farmer's market because he supports local businesses. So we have two questions here. In reality, the two questions are absolutely the same in meaning. Why or how come? How come is much more colloquial, but it means exactly the same as why. The problem is that with how come, the sentence structure changes. So let's do why first. He's shopping at the farmer's market because he supports local businesses. Why? Why is he shopping at the farmer's market? Instead, in the second question, the question with how come, let's see if you can do it on your own. The structure remains straight. It doesn't change. It doesn't invert. How come? How come he is shopping at the farmer's market? The structure remains in exactly the same chronological order as the sentence itself with how come. So actually it's very easy. How come? Next. I stopped fencing because I got injured. Fencing is a sport with a sword. A sword is a metal weapon which they used a lot in the Middle Ages, and now the sword is used for the sport fencing, which is all protected so it's not dangerous. And the Three Musketeers were often fencing in the story. Injured means when you get hurt, when you hurt yourself. So I stopped fencing because I got injured. Why? Why did you stop fencing? Why did you stop fencing? Or we could use the more colloquial form, which is actually easier also to structure. How come? How come you stopped fencing? Exercises with where questions or when questions. Next. We were walking in a park in Caracas when we got attacked. Where? Where were we walking when we got attacked? Next. I've lived in many countries in Europe. Where? Where have you lived? Or where have you lived in Europe? Next. I think she'll be back for Christmas. When? When do you think she'll be back? Next. She plans on finishing her studies by the end of the year. When? When does she plan on finishing her studies? Exercises with which questions or how questions. Next. He'll wear his sneakers on Friday and his leather shoes on Sunday. Which? Which shoes will he wear on Friday or on Sunday? It's really irrelevant. Which shoes will he wear on Friday? Next. I'm going to the cinema on Saturday night. Which? Which day are you going to the cinema? You could also ask which night, which evening, and so on. You could also ask which cinema, but we haven't said it in the sentence, so there's no answer to that. So, which night are you going to the cinema? Next. She's doing very well, thanks. How? How is she doing? Or you could also ask, how is she? Next. Fine, thanks. How? How are you? That's the easiest. How are you? Exercises with how much or how many questions. Next. That'll be £3, thank you. How much? Before I give you the answer to this one, I realized that this one is tricky because I really wanted a very normal, simple question. So, how much is it? However, the answer could lead you to using the future. How much will that be? But normally people ask, how much is it? Or how much? And the person asking for the money will often use the future and say, that'll be £3, please, or that'll be £3, thank you. So, how much is it is the best question here. Next. A software engineer earns over £50,000 a year. How much? How much does a software engineer earn in a year? I'd like a dozen eggs, please. A dozen means 12. I'd like a dozen eggs, please. How many? How many eggs would you like? Next. There are 20 people in my class. How many? How many people are there in your class? Remember that people is plural, so we need to use how many, because in some languages people get confused because in their own language people is singular. Exercises with how long is referring to measurements questions. Next. The swimming pool is 25 meters long. So this how long question is referring to the length of the physical length and not the length of time. The swimming pool is 25 meters long. How long? How long is the swimming pool? Next. My new skirt is knee length. How long? How long is your new skirt? Knee length means it goes down to the knee. It's as long as the knee. Next. My hair is shoulder length. How long? How long is your hair? Again, shoulder length means as long as the shoulders. How old questions and how far questions. Next. My grandfather is 86 years old. How old? How old is your grandfather? Next. It's not polite to ask a lady her age. Polite means it's not very elegant. It's not polite to ask a lady her age. How old? How old are you? And the lady can get offended and say it's not polite to ask a lady her age. Next. I live 10 minutes away by car from school. How far? So how far is asking about the distance. I live 10 minutes away by car from school. How far? How far do you live from school? One could also ask, how far from school do you live? Next. My hotel was 5 minutes on foot from the beach. How far? How far was your hotel from the beach? Or also, how far from the beach was your hotel? Listen and repeat exercises with whose questions. Next. This debit card is mine. Whose? Whose is this debit card? It's referring to who does the debit card belong to. Next. They are his books. Whose? Whose books are they? In both these cases, you can use two forms actually. So, whose are these books or whose books are they? And in the previous one, whose is this debit card or whose debit card is this? Both are correct. Exercises with who questions or whom questions. And these two have the slightly more complicated form referring to the object of the sentence as well. He's been studying with the best professors. If we want to know the subject, we ask who. Who has been studying with the best professors? Instead, if we want to know the question to ask about the object of the sentence, we'll ask whom or who for the object. Who has he been studying with? Not forgetting the preposition at the end of the sentence. Who has he been studying with? Next, we had already met her fiancé at the beach. To ask for the subject, we'll say who. Who had already met her fiancé at the beach? Fiancé is the person you promised to marry. So just not a normal boyfriend or girlfriend, but the person you've promised to marry. Who had already met her fiancé at the beach? If instead we want to discover the object of the sentence, we'll ask whom or who. Who? Who had we already met at the beach? Okay, so these are the sentences which I would like you to practice various times, because the more you listen and try thinking about them and repeating them, the easier they'll come to you. Now, I sincerely hope that you've been able to practice your question formation, your more complex question formation for advanced learners of English. And I recommend you not only practice these questions with the video, but also listen to the audio whilst you're traveling, ironing, doing chores, so that you can really consolidate your question formation, and so it'll become more spontaneous. So don't forget to also listen and repeat in your free time when you're doing something not very important, where your mind is not taken up by anything, and you can really consolidate your question formation. And I'm sure you'll reap the benefits of all this practice. Now, if you want to practice your speaking further, don't forget to check up here my Fast Fluency Trainer, where you can practice listening, repeating, forming questions, practice all your grammar revision, all whilst driving, commuting, doing chores, just so you keep your speaking up. You manage to practice your speaking so that you become a confident speaker of English. Or if you'd rather take your learning into your own hands, then check out my Speak English Successfully course, in which I'll teach you strategies for learning English all on your own, choosing the materials that best fit your needs and are most exciting for you. Those are the materials with which you'll then learn to speak best. Thank you for buying my product, and I look forward to seeing you again in the future. Carry on the good work. Bye.